So yeah, well, first of all, thanks for giving me the time, Jason. So I was watching the movie and I was interested in. You mentioned the genesis of it. What was the genesis of the movie? I was kind of interested, like how you came to about the script and how the whole thing started. The production came together.
Sure. So, funny story. We actually had the location first before anything.
Really?
And yeah. So my producing partners, Jonathan and Maggie Hittman, called me up and said, "Hey, we have this great location at this abandoned hospital in Noonan, Georgia, where they shot The Walking Dead.
Right.
Let's come up with an idea." And so we started coming up with this crazy idea, and it was going to be like, all of a sudden we realized, holy shit, this is Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome with this blood cult and all these like crazy, weird ideas. And like, realistically, we can't do this. And so it was kind of like we had a very set budget on what we were trying to make because we had an investor as well. We had an investor and we had a location. And we were like, what are we going to do? And so we started talking, and the first iteration of it became a dead teenager story, which is just like, Billy cheated on me with Sally and blah, 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 blah,
Right,
blah.
right.
I was like, well, that's not, and I told the writers, I was like, Jonathan and Maggie, I was like, that's not deep enough. Like, this doesn't work. And so Jonathan being an entertainment attorney, and this all came about as in the election. Like, it was November 4th, 2016. Like, I think we got the call maybe a few days before the election to the opportunity to do the film. And then it was a few days after the election when we started kind of going over it. And then it was around like mid-November when we started to kind of rethink things. And honestly, man, I remember growing up. I'm 46 years old.
Sure.
I remember growing up in the early 90s, and, right-wing Nazism and all those things were kind of a real thing in Georgia. I'm from here.
Right.
And so we kind of started to have that sidebar conversation, and Jonathan Hickman started to talk about the 1989 speech, the 1,000 Points of Light, that George Bush Sr. started to talk about, in his campaign and all those things, and how it transcended into Ruby Ridge. And it's kind of like all these little things that went layered, go one foot in front of the other. If you look back in history, you realize that all these pieces are somewhat connected. And so that was kind of the aha moment. And we said, you know what? Why don't we take that dead teenager story that you're talking about and let's set it in 1992. Let's call it a rave, and then let's integrate these other items because, the election had just happened, and fortuitously or not, we understood what that kind of nationalism meant because we had lived through it.
Right.
And so that was kind of what pushed all of that. And so prior to January 6th and prior to all the polarization throughout the Trump presidency, et cetera, we just had the foresight to say, this is where it's headed because we've been here before, and it's going to be worse this time. And we were right. And so that's what prompted kind of the subtext of figuring out who those characters were and why they were acting the way they were and what they were doing, and gave them kind of motivation. And so that's why we were choosing those idealisms to kind of portray as evil in the same way that I grew up with, ironically, the Russians being the bad guys in the 80s. We just got lucky, I guess.
Yeah, so because I was interested in it's kind of poignant, especially like how specific the details you got were correct in some of the movement of the Trump supporters later on. Like specifically, use the word America First, which I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but there's a whole political movement called America First, full of extremely like hard right wing, full white nationalist type people that call themselves that. I mean, it was interesting seeing those words pop up, and because I just watched the other week this documentary about them by Louis Theroux on BBC, which just came out. I think that was like last month, and it's interesting that like you not only got the idea, but like the specific mannerisms and like the phrases and wordings of these people down like years before it would become popular. It just really struck me how interesting that was. Like, was that like something that was that a phrase you heard before? Or was that something that like you just like chanced upon? Like, I'm interested in where that came from.
Honestly, it was me and my friends in an abandoned hospital with a tiny little bucket of money trying to make this horror film.
Yeah.
And we just started making up ideas, and we started thinking about things. And I want to say, I can't even take credit for it, to be honest with you. We had like a list of nationalist ideas on a piece of paper, and we're like, well, paint that, and then paint this, and then paint this symbol because this is kind of one of those other symbols. Like, we just kind of had these broad stroke ideas and just kind of went with it and like leaned into it. We didn't really know that it was going to become a thing, but unfortunately we had the intuition, having lived through it, that it probably would be. And we knew in that moment in 2016, we shot the movie, just to be clear, we started production on December 5th, 2016. So that's a month after the election. So this was not premeditated or anything like that. And then we shot the movie in 9 days. So before Christmas 2016, this movie was in the can. This was not, reverse engineered politically or anything. We just knew that whatever was coming was going to be a switch in the dogma or a gasoline on a fire that was slowly smoldering that just needed another ignition to be like an issue. And so we just kind of intuitively leaned into it and went with it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Wow. So I mean, the budget, the production, 9 days, that's really quick. That's a really short time to make a feature film. I mean, that's a crazy short amount of time. Now, was that all the hospital stuff, or was it so I know there were some scenes that were shot in black and white back at, I'm assuming, at someone's house. Were those part of that 9 day production, or?
So what we did is we shot in the 9 days, we did all the hospital stuff. And then we went back and did 1 day at a house. And the idea that I had was like, let's do these kind of dream sequences, but let's do them practically in kind of a cheap way. And so we projected Birth of a Nation on top of these characters.
I was going to ask about that.
Kind of, talking about, what this really means symbolically. And like, it's weird because, it's so far removed from, we're talking almost, 7 years ago at this point. And it's interesting to think like that is still so poignant in what it means. But so we just decided to kind of use that as a subtext of the main character's inner monologue. Like, he's going to these meetings, he's getting converted, he's down and out. It's all the things that kind of pushed us into the reality of the polarization of America. And these were just kind of ideas. These are just artistic ideas at the time that we were thinking about and what we would use. I mean, we were just hanging out at my buddy's house and said, okay, let's, project a projector of these ideas on top of the characters themselves.
Yeah.
And, it's very lo-fi at the end of the day.
Right. But I was interested because you used Birth of a Nation. You also used some stock footage of Hitler, I believe, and a couple other some stuff like that. And I was interested why you chose those because obviously, Nazism is kind of on the rise in the last 5 years politically. It's been kind of at the second coming, unfortunately. And I was interested why. At the time, I think there was some rumblings of that, but I think it wasn't until later that those things became even more severe. But I was interested.
Honestly, because, I grew up in Atlanta in 1992, and there was a pretty big skinhead population at that time. And I can remember being a kid and wearing like a Nazi sign with a cross through it was like a T-shirt. I wore it like as a, like a Ghostbuster sign, like no Nazis, right?
Right.
And we were doing a rock show, and I remember they shut the rock show down because skinheads wanted to come and fight us. And I'm like a 15, 16-year-old kid at this point. And it's like, and that kind of interaction within human beings kind of lingers with you, like smoldering coals, right? So like whatever that means. And so we started thinking about what this world really looks like. It kind of pushed us into that direction to think, and it's almost like pastiche, right? Like it's almost surrealism. It's not meant to be taken completely seriously. Like at the end of the movie, we go into like this kind of Beethoven crescendo. Like it really is art in the sense of what it means. But it was important to really kind of say, if we don't pay attention to these small things that are happening at the time, historically, then we really do run the risk of that. And unfortunately, like you said, we were on the right side of history projecting that, which I'm not excited about because I don't think we're in a good place. But I think artistically, as a horror film, it's kind of like, okay, cool, like it is that. But I'm glad you're one of probably 5 journalists that have called me and said, I really get what you tried to do with this. And
right.
I really understand that there's a much deeper conversation to be had than this kind of like low budget slasher flick. And part of that, I think, has to do with branding and the fact that, I acquiesced to changing the name because I think had it remained Deadthirsty, I feel like the film would have had a little bit more commercial success because the audience wouldn't have been premeditated to, slasher flick, right? And I think by calling it Rave Party Massacre, people are like, well, there are more kills and all these things, and they miss the underlying tones of the things that we're really saying, which is, hey guys, we're in a real dangerous place.
Right.
Which is the film that we tried to make only because we were still affected by the election less than a month ago when we made the movie. It
was topical. It was in your head at the moment. It just
100%.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had figured because the movie came out in 2010. I assumed the production took place later, but I think it was that makes a lot of sense that it was so close to that moment in time. It really makes a lot of sense. I guess,
and I was going through some personal stuff too that I needed to deal with, and so it was like more blood and more things, and like exercise these kind of demons in an artistic way to kind of take a step back and rebirth, which I think everybody needs to do as human beings.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting to hear. Yeah, I guess my other question I had, besides because this movie was obviously filmed around the same time as the other movie. I believe it was Shifting Gears. They were produced pretty close to each other, if I understand that correctly. Is that true?
Correct. Yeah. So Shifting Gears was shot in 2015. So I had just come off Shifting Gears for about a year, and then I hired James Suttles, who's now my business partner, and we're producing films together, to come on and DP the movie. We had like a crew of maybe 15 people. Like it really was like a family. Like we celebrated a birthday. Like it was weird. And we also, while we were in the hospital, believe it or not, we saw props that were left over from The Walking Dead. So it was like, it was this kind of surreal moment in time to like shoot in these 2 weeks. Period,
right. I was going to ask, like, coming off of what was probably, I think it was like one of your highest budget movies, so it was probably one of your smaller budgeted movies. Like, how was that transition? Like transitioning to what be like a more big budget commercial property to like what this is clearly is a very artistic, like passion driven movie. What did that like really? How was that like for you personally? The crew obviously was much smaller, but how do you personally adjust to that transition?
I just love making movies.
Right.
I feel like this is what I was put on the earth to do, and so as long as I'm alive, like I want to do it. And so whether I'm directing or I'm producing or I have money or I don't have money, whatever movie I get involved with, I get involved with it. I get behind it 110%. And so for me, Shifting Gears was an amazing experience to feel and to expand my wings and to get confidence. And then with Deadthirsty, it was kind of going back to the grassroots where it's like, what is the story you're trying to tell? And ultimately, the story that I was trying to tell is pay attention to the things that are going on around you, because if you end up drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, you might wake up in a hospital, was kind of like the subtext of it. And so the monster isn't a real monster. The monster is more of the idealism. And to me, that's much more scary than something physical that you can kill, because you can't kill Hitler. You can't kill Trump. You can't kill dogma. It exists in a way, good or bad, forever. And so as human beings, we just need to understand what it is that we're being said. And I'm not saying that all people that like Trump are bad, by any means. I'm just saying that the dogma and the shift in how we look at things is really important. And I feel like with, social media and the echo chambers and things like that, we stopped talking to each other and just started to kind of not discuss things, but more get ourselves riled up without another side, both good or bad, having some say in it. And so that was kind of ultimately what that film was about. And I don't know if you know about my new project that's coming out, Division, is actually about the polarization in America.
I did hear about that. I was going to ask about your other movies a little bit later, but I did find it interesting. To me, I thought, especially to portray that like kind of idea in a pre-social media, basically pre-internet. I mean, 1992 there was the internet, but it was basically pre-internet. It was pre-major expansion of the internet, where it was that same idea but contained to like a singular setting where people aren't communicating with each other within the singular setting. It does make sense that you say that. That does actually translate to the story quite well. It's really interesting. I guess I have a couple more follow-up questions that I would like to ask about the other upcoming stuff.
Sure, of course.
I guess also because my article is going to be a bit about the political slants. It's kind of a follow-up to the Through documentary. I'm going to kind of join them together as kind of a thing in a review of your thing as well, but of Deadthirsty. About what's your thought about the? I mean, obviously things are not You've said that you don't think things are good in the country right now. What's your thought about the rapid expansion and rise in far-right extremism in America in the last 4 or 5 years? It feels like it's been extremely. It's happened very quickly. That it's almost like overnight that how fast these right-wing groups have kind of expanded online and in real life. You know, how have you? What is your opinion on that and how it relates to the movie?
Unfortunately, sorry, my dog just walked into my room, and she's old, so I'm going to let her lay down.
Okay.
It's a hard question to answer because you hear. Go outside. I'm busy. Okay. Daddy's working. Go. She's 13, so she's been with me through a lot. I'm sad, man. I mean, honestly, I'm sad. I really, I was so affected by the election in kind of a caught up in the moment way that I couldn't believe that something like this could happen. And then, looking back and seeing, the day after the interview, these kind of Nazi signs start showing up. It's like, when you give rise to it's okay to be crazy, then there's no accountability. So like where I'm at right now, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Mm-hmm. Take her, for example. This is somebody who is not really educated in a way that is grounded in a sense of historical understanding or a political upbringing. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like, you could not have any kind of political upbringing whatsoever in a traditional sense and still be very fruitful and good for the country. What I'm saying is that these people are digging their heels into the ground against science, against, economy, against, your fellow man, against these things. And it makes me sad because it's not the country that my grandfathers fought for in World War II. It's just not. And it's like, it's not the same thing. And having spent my whole life as an artist and having experienced all kinds of things firsthand, it affects me in a way that just makes me sad. And I think, I hope, and I feel like it's my job as an artist to at least create something that somebody talks about. So the fact that we're even having this conversation, I mean, I did my job. I'm so grateful that you took the time out to even contact me and say, hey, I want to talk about this movie, because to me, it meant a lot. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about anything other than I wanted to really say something. I wanted to say something that I thought was important to me personally, and whether the world got it, I didn't really care about. You know what I mean? So sure. It was like really just leaving you with those kinds of ideas. And so it honestly, man, it just makes me sad. It's just like, how can we get back to some sense of middle ground? And honestly, I don't know if we can. I think, I hope we can. I think that there's a lot that needs to be figured out. I think that, America, by definition, including myself in this, is racist just by being American. It's like inside of our dogma, inside of like who we are, whether we like it or not. The most woke person in the world, if you're from here, you still have that kind of, you can't be perfect, right? You can't be this person that is like, I'm not racist, I'm not biased, I'm not anything. Like, that doesn't exist. It's not in the human condition, number one, but number two, it doesn't exist in America. But before this kind of tipping point that had happened with everything, I thought that there was more dialogue, but I unfortunately was really shocked to see how right we really were, and ultimately sad that was the case, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting response. Thank you. I mean, that's very insightful, actually. I agree with what you just said, so I appreciate that. Before I let you go, because I do have to get going here with my own life, I do have a couple questions about your other movies, so I can plug those. I had a question about Let's Make It. I was having trouble finding a way to watch Let's Make It. Is that been released commercially, or?
So no, Let's Make It was a passion project that we did, and so it hasn't been released yet. Mm-hmm. It kind of got made and then kind of put on the shelf, and it's a good movie. It's one of those. It was a play, and so it was written by Grant McGowan, and then we turned it into a movie. So
okay, well, and then obviously The Division, which I saw the trailer for, which I was actually very interested to watch. That one, when did that finish completion? Is that movie done, or are you guys going through the editing process?
No, actually, that movie was finished about 4 weeks ago.
No way, that's amazing.
So the trailer just came out, and it's funny because, you know, I made Division because, well, number one, I thought it was a good script that Jamie wrote, and so I agreed to do it. But again, it was kind of like, for me as an artist, at the end of the day, I believe we have more in common than we do different.
Sure.
And I feel like anything I can do to remind people of that is the idea. It's like Division's theory, you know, thematically is not to give anything away. So you have to watch the movie, which you can talk to me offline and I can send you a screener or whatnot, and you can talk about the film. But it's like all the things that happened that led up to January 6th didn't really have to happen. It just became like almost like a international dare, where one person dared somebody to do something, that dared somebody to do something, that dared somebody to do something, that dared somebody to do something. So all these consequential lines were drawn in the sand that kept getting crossed over and over and over again, until the point where there's a point of no return where you can't come back. So whatever that final line is that you cross that you can't come back, thematically is the same idea in Deadthirsty, right? It's like you buy into this, whatever it is, good or bad, and you create these lines in which you won't cross, and then you cross that line and create a new one. And then once that line's created, you know, you cross it and create a new one, and so on and so forth. But at some point, you get to a point where you can't come back on either side. And ultimately, that's kind of what both films are about. Even though they're totally different, Deadthirsty is a horror picture, and Division is kind of like this weird, quirky drama.
Right, but the same themes are running throughout, so that's really interesting. Well, I'm really excited to watch it. You'll have to definitely send me a screener, or even just give me a link to when the movie comes out where I can go to pay to watch it. I'd be very happy to plug that and do everything I can to get it publicized. So I appreciate the time, Jason. I'll let you go for now, but thank you so much for doing this interview with me. I really appreciate it. And
yeah, man. Hey, thanks again. Really, I'm honored that you really like the movie. I put a lot of hard work into it and was really trying to say something. So anytime somebody understands that, it means the world to me, and please don't take that lightly.
Well, it shows you. I could see the hard work put in, man. It was really excellent. So thank you for your time, and you have a good night. Say good night to your dog. Hope she's doing okay.
I will, and I'll text you my email.
Yeah.
And then let's just stay in touch, and I'll try and send you a screener of Division, and keep you posted of that.
I will. That sounds great. Well, thanks so much, and you have a good one.
You too, Patrick. Take care, buddy. Bye.
Bye. Woo! Oh, fuck. I really fucked up. This is too much. This is too much for even like an internet bit, man. This is too much. I've gone too far. Ah! I don't even know what else to say. That was incredible. That was an amazing display. Shit. Okay. Hope you enjoy this recording, dude. Bye.